All right, everybody, welcome back. If you had to pick one relationship that's super important to you, which one would you pick? Some of you might pick more than one. Some of you are like, I don't know that I would pick one. If you have a relationship in your life that is important to you, today is a really great topic because we're going to talk about how to build and maintain relationships. These relationships can be any relationships. They can be work related, friends, romantic partners, parents. I mean, some things apply more than others, but you'll see there are a lot of great tips in here for strengthening relationships if you're interested. So our topics for this, I almost said workshop presentation, are the nature of relationships, reasons for attraction, stages of relationships, relational maintenance, and romantic relationships. All righty, so let's talk about the nature of relationships. We're going to define relationship as a connection, association, or attachment with others. I want to show you guys, for those who were with my last one, my ring's looking a little more purple. I don't know if you can tell, but that's fun because purple, that's so funny. Purple represents love as I understand it. Again, for those who maybe didn't fully watch my other videos, I'm wearing a mood ring today just for funsies as I do these topics, just to see what happens. And it's changed from blue to purple, so I love that. Okay, as far as relationships go, you've probably heard the term platonic relationships. It just means that those are relationships that are not physically intimate. And typically we think of them as friends. Oh, if somebody says, oh, it's just platonic, it means there's no physical interaction between the two. When we think about relationship partners, a term that we might hear is interdependent. That's when we need to depend on somebody else for some reason. This could apply to the workplace, meaning these are your coworkers, so you rely on each other to do the job. A parent, most of us, at least to some extent, are interdependent on our parents, for example. It could be that your roommates or you're living together because you're dating. There's an element of interdependence there as well. We're going to define intimacy for our chapter here as close and deeply personal contact with another. Not necessarily physical intimacy, but intimacy in general, which means, again, as far as disclosure, we've started to share personal things. We are building a deeper connection, is what we mean by intimacy. And if you are keeping track of slides, I think there are 12. I could be mistaken, but 12-ish. So we're going to talk about the nature of relationships a little bit more in terms of characteristics. Duration obviously just means how long has the relationship been going on. Contact frequency, just like it sounds. Do you see this person every time you go to class, every day you go to work, that kind of thing. Sharing, our book talks about revealing and disclosing information about oneself. I'm going to share my thoughts with you. Support, we talked about this a little bit when we talked about listening, which would be maybe you're providing assistance, aid, or comfort to another by way of listening or actually doing things for somebody else. Interaction variability, you probably can make sense of this one. Variability means like different types. So different types of interactions, or in this case, different types of topics. And then as far as characteristics of a relationship go, most relationships have some kind of goal, which is expectations about the relationship, how it's going to work, how often, or let's say the direction. Oftentimes we have goals or expectations around where a relationship is headed, depending on the nature of the relationship. As far as purpose of relationships, we obviously have work related, we might have task related, we would have social reasons. I would add, we also obviously are born into relationships. Whether we keep those or not throughout our life is up to us, but work related is obviously once you start working, in any capacity, you start having those relationships. Task related could mean that, let's say you're in some kind of board or volunteer group or something like that. There's some sort of task at hand. Maybe it could be like a small group in a class assignment. Those are task related relationships. Social is just like it sounds. Maybe you get together with like a meetup. I don't know if people still do meetups, but like you're going to go salsa dancing or something like that, or to a golf range, things like that, just to connect with other people. We have relationships for those purposes as well. As far as characteristics of good relationships, and by the way, that's why you see the picture of these people volunteering. His little badge says volunteer. So that's obviously what they're doing in this picture. Our authors would talk about characteristics of good relationships, which is important to think about. I have somebody in one of my classes this semester who said, I don't really have good relationships with my family. In fact, they treat me worse than other people. Of course, that makes me sad because we don't get to choose our family. And if you are younger, you're still living with them. So that's a little bit harder to work through, which we talk about in another chapter. But as far as friendships go, we're thinking about the people that we would choose. And so when I referenced family a few minutes ago, we can choose to have friendships, and we certainly have relationships with family, but we're thinking of a good relationship is one that is meaningful and beneficial. So I guess maybe we're really focusing more on healthy relationships is what I would add to what the book is presenting. Those would be relationships that allow us to grow psychologically, emotionally, and physically as needed in whichever ways we find important to us. When we think about more of romantic relationships, some of the reasons that we might be attracted to people, I remember learning about this in college and thinking, I find that interesting. But our book would say physical proximity, which is where are you physically located as it relates to the other person? So are you sitting next to them in class? Are you always working out where they are at the gym? Or do you sit next to them at work? That kind of thing. Sat next to them on a plane. Because they were in our physical proximity, we had the opportunity to form an attraction. And then number 2 says physical attractiveness. Most people would say a physical attractiveness is important to them. However, how people define physical attractiveness will vary. So people are attracted to those people they find attractive, if that makes sense. And then there is a topic here that says perceived gain or exchange theory. We form relationships with those who offer rewards that outweigh the costs. So this is a good example would be somebody's dating a personal trainer. And they think, oh, wow, well, that's how we met. We're in physical proximity, but also, I don't know, I like the way this person trains. And so also is very flattering, or she is very flattering. And so then we start dating, and then we start going, oh, wow, okay, I could see us having some kind of relationship. But generally speaking, when we have the exchange theory would say, we have relationships or are attracted to people because the benefit outweighs the costs. There is always a longstanding discussion on being attracted to people because of similarity versus differences. The similarity thesis would say people with similar cultural, ethnic, or again, any cultures are drawn to each other. We often hear opposites attract, and that's true. The last I have heard of relationships is, yes, opposites attract, but they don't always create sustainable relationships because sometimes the differences outweigh the similarities. That's not true in all cases, but I do think the research leans more toward people who are similar, or at least recognize the similarities. Again, not just ethnically, if you will, or culturally because I'm from a country, but like anything. Again, if I always see you at the skate park every Saturday, and then we start talking and then we build a friendship, we have a lot in common. Again, that's cultures, and we're similar in a lot of ways, which is likely if we're hanging out the same places, that's more likely to have a sustainable relationship, I think. And we talked about disclosure. It can increase liking by creating support and trust. But as we said in a previous chapter, that disclosure can't just happen all at once like a fire hose and you just blast everything out of somebody. It needs to be appropriate. It needs to be mutual, meaning both people are disclosing, and it needs to happen at a good pace for people to be comfortable with it. One of my most favorite things in all of communication to talk about is these relationship stages. I want to say this is Mark Knapp, but for some reason I'm drawing a blank. But they present phases of coming together and then also phases of coming apart. So I'm going to spend more time on the coming apart one. But the phases the author would say we go through would be initiating. That's when we first catch someone's eye or get an interest. Then we move on to experimenting, which is like, oh, we start having a conversation, maybe over social media, text, or small chat in the gym. Then we decide, oh, okay, well, I actually kind of like talking to you. So now I start developing feelings. So I move into the intensifying phase. Once we start, I think there's a quiz question on this, so I'm going to read it. But once individuals start taking on a new identity as a social unit, and so it's like Jack and John, they're coming to the party as opposed to Jack is coming and also John is coming. It's Jack and John are coming to the party, or we could say Jack and Jill. When we start thinking of them as a couple, that's in the integrating phase. Whoops. And then bonding is when they make some sort of like public announcement, Facebook official, which if most of you aren't on Facebook, I don't know what the equivalent of that is on the other socials, I'm going to be honest, but something like that, or like a marriage announcement, engagement announcement. We're all familiar with these phases. Then what I find interesting is there are also specific phases or clear phases when relationships start coming apart. Again, this is more, I think, designed to talk about romantic, but it could be platonic, which is friends. It could be also, I suppose, work related. But for me, if you find yourself, your relationship is starting to decline, you could think about which stage you're in and try to work your way back up to those stages on the coming together. Well, meaning if you start falling, you're disconnecting, what were the things you were doing with each other when you were dating? Can you get back into that loop and work your way back up so that you're more bonding? But it says, so you're living your best life, but then at some point, not all relationships will do this, but the relationships that start coming apart start with, oh, well, now we're differentiating. You actually can't use my toothbrush. No, you can't wear my shirts. No, I don't necessarily need to go everywhere with you. That's like one sign that you're headed down that path. Circumscribing is a word that you might not have heard, but that's when you're starting to argue more. You don't talk as much and maybe don't spend as much time together. I know a lot of married people, research will also talk about this in terms of married people as well. Like they don't talk a lot, but when they do, they're starting to fight. That's circumscribing. Stagnating is when you're just like in a vast nothingness. Like I've had this actually before when I was dating somebody and I lived with them, which was sort of like a trial for me. I thought, oh, I don't know how comfortable I feel with this. I'm so glad I did because I learned some things that would not have been great for marriage. So I'm glad I did this early on. But we did get to a point at some point where we were stagnating, which is kind of feel like you're walking on eggshells, which means like we're not going forward. We're just kind of not doing anything. So kind of take it or leave it kind of a thing. And then at some point, maybe you start actively avoiding each other, which is like, oh, is this person gonna be home here at this time? Maybe I won't go home at that time. Maybe I'll go home another time. Not to say that you have to go through all of these phases, but these are kind of signs for me and notifications you could be looking out for, like patterns. And then the last, of course, is when you finally decide to terminate things and you go your separate ways. If you are looking to maintain your behavior, as I said, keep yourself from going down the coming apart phases, here's some things you could do. You could try to stay positive, not just when things are going bad, but like generally so that you don't hit that decline. Openness, again, is self-disclosure. You're sharing how you feel about things, or you just generally talk about things. Assurances are like, oh, thank you for doing that. I see your value. I appreciate you. Sharing tasks. Maybe there are things you like to do, like gardening, or maybe you don't like to do them, but you sign up to do them together. You're like, hey, well, we really need to get this garage done. Maybe we can work on it together. Social networks, just like it sounds, social doesn't necessarily have to be online. It could be like go out and visit friends as that unit where people saw you together, the Jack and John or the Jack and Jill thing. Go back and start doing that stuff again. Conflict management would be not just avoiding, I hope we never have a conflict, but actually working through it, making the effort. And then advice, getting advice also may be helpful. Find other people who've been, have healthy relationships and see what they're doing. A lot of this applies, like I said, actually to friends and also even workplace relationships, so that you don't have to be the quiet quitter. If you can't, some of it depends if it's in your control or not, but you can try to do these things if the relationships are important to you, and hopefully get the other person to do them with you. We're going to talk a little bit more about specifically romantic relationships, wherein we say that love is this is what the book says, multi-dimensional concept that includes several different orientations toward the loved person. All that means is you're in your feels, if you will. I can love someone and be upset with them. I can love someone and not want to be around them. Or I can love someone and want to spend every minute with them. There's just this wide range of emotions in romantic relationships that comes with love. And that's why it says multidimensional. As it says, it involves a bond and close affection with another person. It says a specific partner, but I think that's probably obvious. There are several psychological features, which again, psychologicals are thoughts and kind of the way we see things. Generally speaking, with romantic relationships, we desire emotional closeness. We would spend some time caregiving or taking care of them. Taking care of them can be interpreted in different ways. So men might think of taking care of as like paying the bills or doing some things around the house. Again, these are stereotypes, so you would want to decide what works for your relationship. But maybe a woman's version of caregiving is making something thoughtful or creating thoughtful plans. Whatever it looks like for you and for the other person, there is action towards giving care. Emotional dependency is something to talk about in terms of a lot of authors and research would say emotional connection, healthy, good, yes. Again, that disclosure creates openness and trust and bonding. But I would caution against emotional dependency, or codependency, which is I'm going to let my emotions be dependent on how you treat me. That's when we can kind of get on an unhealthier path. But dependency here is more of I'm going to trust you with my emotions, and I would want you to trust me with your emotions. Separation anxiety, again, I think the authors, and if you look more into research, if I can't be away from my partner, my romantic partner, for periods of time, that causes me anxiety. That would be less on the healthier side than having some healthy distance and saying, yep, go with your friends, I'll go with my friends, or not even that, just any amount of separation in a healthy romantic relationship. You would want to work out, I think, what works for that relationship. But I would say there's probably a good indicator if you are anxious when you are separated, something to think about. And then willingness to sacrifice. The research is pretty clear on this in terms of definitely people who have long-term relationships, but certainly in marriages. I don't think in the research I've done, I've ever come across a marriage that said basically you don't have to ever sacrifice anything. And we've been married 50 years, so just, don't ever sacrifice. Any relationship with, again, it doesn't have to be marriage. There's likely going to be sacrifice because there are now two people involved. So in this chapter, we talked about the nature of relationships, reasons for attraction, stages of relationships, relationship maintenance, and also romantic relationships. Again, I hope you find this helpful. I can't wait to see what you put in your posts, and I'll see you next time.